Hey everyone, it's me Jackuwarz again, back with another NASCAR Fantasy Live video. We're still about 2 weeks away from the season from starting, and in the meantime, for this week I feel like sharing my fantasy tips with you guys, even though this is only my 3rd year. In those first 2 years I think I've soaked up a lot of knowledge that I just can't help from sharing. Okay, so tip number 1. I'd say do a lot of research. My go-to website for driver information is hands down driveraverages.com. I like the interface there. I like the way the pages are laid out. Next to no nonsense, it just gives me the finishing information, also the stage information. Racing Reference is also a good alternative to driver averages, but I like how neat and tidy driveraverages.com is. The things you want to research: you want to look at track history, tendencies, what drivers are going to be good on what track, and if they're having a hot season. Tip number 2 I have is keep up with recent trends. Kind of ties into the last bit I said about tip number 1, but you also want to keep an eye on the point standing. Look for those drivers that are going to be on the hot streak, and mostly those you think that should be earning for stage points. Because drivers in 17th and 18th with about 10 races to go, those are the drivers you should expect to be earning stage points, doing everything they can earn more points to make the playoffs. Moving on to tip number 3, you want to find a solid pace to expend your big name plays. So for guys like Chase Elliott, Denny Hamlin, Kevin Harvick, I'd write down notes for tracks you plan on playing those drivers. It's going to be really easy to shred through all those uses for those drivers. So for example, you may want to schedule Chase Elliott for all the road course tracks. And of course, if something goes wrong for one of your drivers you planned on starting that 1 week, then always update the schedule after each race. Because in the world of fantasy, anything can happen. You just gotta be on top of that, you know? So my 4th tip, you wanna look at the driver ownership percentages. This is going to be useful for picking the better driver, and if you're looking at maintaining a points lead, then picking the driver that everyone else is using isn't a bad idea. It also helps identify sleeper picks, whereas if you want to gain points. Being frequent with sleeper picks is tip number 5. It never hurts to gamble for results from the smaller drivers. After all, this is going to help you save uses for those big name drivers. Say for instance, the playoff Richmond race from last year. They can gain you tons of points over most players, just like Austin Dillon did in that race. And the nicest thing about doing sleeper picks is that they'll likely not ever run out of uses. Here's something I really like to keep in mind for tip number 6, and that's: there are not that many wrong answers at Daytona and Talladega. It's okay to stack your lineup with backmarker drivers, because to be frank, those drivers have just as much of a chance as the big name drivers do at surviving the mayhem, the big ones, and collecting some good points. This is also where I would save those big name drivers, those including Kyle Busch, Martin Truex, Kevin Harvick, and Chase Elliott. Of course, some exception can be Denny Hamlin, most of the Hendrick drivers outside of Chase, and all of the Penske drivers. Amongst the well-funded teams, those are the ones you should lean towards. Everyone else, I'd rather keep my starts away from those races. So Penske's typically good here. If you want stage points from these races, you should lean on them. As for which one, I would say pairing Logano with Blaney. That seems to be good. Back in the summer Daytona race, Joey Logano swept the stages, and despite getting caught up in a wreck, he still walked away with a meaty 30 points. However, if you're still hell-bent on playing somebody like Denny Hamlin or Chase Elliott for these kind of races, either do it in a scenario where you are really behind on uses for one of those two, or put them in just your bonus picks. Because remember, whoever you put in those bonus picks, there's no limit for that. Maybe pick drivers that aren't in your lineup to win the stages, and then go with either Elliott or Hamlin to win the race. Another good thing to do on Daytona and Talladega is balance your lineups, as in roll with no more than 3 big dogs, and then the other half should be sleeper picks and backmarker cars. Another good approach would be to pick 2 drivers from each manufacturer, because if there's one thing that's really dangerous to do at super speedways is to say pick the entire Hendrick team and then watch them all get caught up in the wreck, just like that playoff Talladega race in 2019. Worst case scenario, you happen to pick the Penske cars in the July Daytona race in 2018 where, oh yeah, they all wrecked. Nobody saw it coming. But I don't think that'll ever happen again. That's just an anomaly. Moving on to tip number 7. It is a good idea to save uses at times, but at the same time, you don't want to save too hard. Those free uses will catch back up to you very quickly. Personally, I like to be at least 1 use behind schedule with some drivers. That'll help even out any possibilities where if I got 2 Chase Elliott plays with about 3 races to go in the regular season, Watkins Glen comes up, I know for certain Elliot's going to run good there, but then all of a sudden he has a mechanical issue, and I have to rely on the next 3 races to get in my last 2 Elliot plays. So I like to find a 11th or a 12th track to schedule my big name drivers for, just in case if I feel like I can squeeze in an extra play. Plus, there's also going to come a time where you're going to get an opportunity to get breaks to save your big name drivers, whether it be a brief slump with them, maybe on some freak accident they're the worst performing driver that week in your lineup, or just some other heinous scenario that could end up popping up. For tip number 8, I would avoid overstacking your lineup with sleepers. Typically, you should have only 1 sleeper in your lineup. You don't want to get too greedy with the sleepers that you have on your lineup, because number 1, not all of them are going to be putting up Austin Dillon performances in the start of the playoffs last year, and 2, that's simply a lot to ask for those specific drivers to do well. Again, you're better off having all those sleepers in the Daytona and Talladega races, and so for most regular race weekends, say on a 1.5-mile track, you should have 5 quality starters and then 1 sleeper pick to stash away in your garage. And if you want to go for a really crazy pick, like say Cole Custer, then you better just have the rest of your lineup be heavy favorites that you know for certain are going to be there to back you up in case, inevitably, then the sleeper doesn't pay off. So tip number 9, we're going to get those stage points. I did a rough guesstimate. Stage points can make up to about 25% of your race result total. So what kind of drivers will get you a lot of stage points? Typically the Penske drivers, they give you a lot of stage points, mainly Ryan Blaney. He's the one that by far gets the most of these stage points. Just about every single race he's there getting chunk loads of stage points. Now he doesn't typically always back that up with a decent race finish, but still it's fun to get as many Ryan Blaney picks in as you can, because I feel gambles like that, they kind of pay off. Typically when Ryan Blaney has a really good race finish, he also backs it up with a lot of stage points. And if he can give you, say, 50 points in one race weekend, then that's very valuable as a fantasy player. If you think somebody's going to get that many stage points, definitely have them in your lineup. So the drivers that typically don't go for stage points are usually the back markers, even at Daytona and Talladega to some extent. Most of the smaller race teams are just there to survive, and then hopefully get a solid top 15 result. Another thing to keep in mind with stage points, for the big tracks, and this really depends on the point standings at the time as well, some of the big name drivers will forgo stage points for pit strategy, and most importantly the race win at these bigger tracks. Some of these bigger tracks include most of the road course races, definitely Pocono, and like I said earlier, whatever the current point standing is, you just gotta evaluate it and see who you think is gonna most likely be gunning for stage points. Now this is something I can personally use more of, but at the same time I'm more weighing in my options with this one, and that's have access to more resources for tip number 10. This means of course having not just a phone but also a tablet, maybe a computer, giving yourself more devices that'll give you access to editing your fantasy teams. For race day, having a scanner, streaming radio communications with your fantasy drivers, that could also help get information on what they're doing earlier ahead of time that maybe the TV broadcast might not cover. Tip number 11, pick drivers based on their practice lap times. This one's a pretty obvious one. This will see who's the fastest car is. But then again, only a select number of races this year are going to be even having practice and qualifying. So when there's a race on the calendar that has that, do pay attention to practice and qualifying. You also want to look at the lap averages, as this is going to show you who's the fastest drivers are going to be during long green flag runs, as well as on short runs too. Another thing with practice is that it's going to give you a good idea for who the pole winner is going to be. Whoever's going to have the fastest lap typically should have the pole winner as well. In 2019, William Byron and Kevin Harvick, they took up most of the poles that season. For tip number 12, I wish I had a tip for bonus picks, but there's never a consistent way to earning these, especially the stage winners. So I'll just share with you my approaches to bonus picks. A few good ideas is to stack them with drivers that are not going to be in your lineup. That's my way to cover more drivers and not get burnt by one that you really felt like should have played, as well as an opportunity to try and save uses. And I also like to have whoever's starting first to win stage 1, because I feel about 70% of the time or maybe 60. The pole winner also wins stage 1. So last season, Brad Keselowski, he won all of his stages in stage 2. I think it was a total of 8 or 9 stages that Keselowski won last season, all of them coming in stage 2. Chase Elliott and Denny Hamlin, those are also worthy candidates to win stage 2 also. For the race winners, you can try being pessimistic with your race winner pick, like say having Joe Gibbs or Penske drivers winning. Good chance the driver you hate the most could end up winning, like say Joey Logano or Kyle Busch. But then again, I didn't really get a whole lot of pessimistic picks working out in my favor, especially not with Kyle Busch. So maybe this is the time where it's good to pick your favorite drivers, because the favorites, Chase Elliott, the fan favorites, they seem to be the one in victory lane now. Kevin Harvick, he won 9 races last year. No reason why he can't win any more this season, right? Don't forget, you can also split the race winner and manufacturer picks. You can have Kurt Busch, a Chevy driver, win the race. But then you can also have Ford as the winning manufacturer. Amongst the race winner and the manufacturer pick, you're only going to be getting at most 10 points from this. But on the other side, this better guarantees that you'll get at least 10 points from one of those 2 picks. So with the bonus picks, you can really put all of your eggs in one basket, pick one driver to win all of it with the corresponding manufacturer, or you can use your bonus picks to cover more ground with drivers that you can't fit in the main lineup. Typically, the latter option is a good option for Daytona and Talladega, and then road courses, you can stack Chase Elliott throughout the bonus picks for that, and you should be okay. You should get at least 20 points if you do that. At tip 13, you should identify your fantasy driver with the worst race situation. Try to do this as soon as you can, because likely that's going to be the driver you're going to end up having to garage. Also keep track of the drivers that have the most stage points. You want those guys to stay in your lineup. You want to find how far behind the driver is by position and if they are a lap down. There's not that many tracks where drivers can overcome being a lap down, and if that's the case, then usually they won't be able to finish better than say 20th. For fantasy, you don't want that. You want everybody to finish in the top 10. So tip number 14 is look into creating multiple entries. I started doing this in the 2020 season, and it's very fun to keep track of multiple rosters instead of just one. It helps remove the sense of pick remorse. So for instance, you can have multiple drivers selected in all of your teams. And one thing I really like from having multiple entries is that if your bonus picks are all different, then hey, at least one of them are going to hit. Especially if you pick all 3 manufacturers amongst 5 rosters. So I definitely had a lot of more fun having multiple rosters. Tip number 15, and this is just something you just gotta accept, and if it happens, don't be discouraged, and don't give up either. Bad fantasy weeks, just having a bad week, drivers aren't getting you a whole lot of points, those are gonna be imminent. These races, random events will occur, they always do. Whether if it's a big crash at a 1.5 miles where there typically isn't. One of your drivers can get a blown tire, blow an engine even, Kurt Busch, Kansas, maybe even lose power steering like Keselowski did in the playoff Bristol race. It's most important that you don't get discouraged by a bad week. Just brush yourself off and move on to the next week. Every player is bound to have bad weeks. Not just you, but every player is bound to have bad weeks. And if it's not you, but your rivals instead, be sure to take advantage of them when they happen. But if you didn't get a good points week, say you got sub 170 points, just find what didn't work and then be sure not to bring that over into the next week. So tip number 16, don't be afraid to ask questions, ask advice from others. I'm on Twitter at Jackuwarz, and feel free to tweet at me if you need help building lineups or just any general questions about fantasy that could help you get more points. There's also RJ Craft at CraftDaddy85. That can also help you. I like to tweet at him for advice also. But then again, you don't want to take all the advice, because some can actually be jinxes. I remember asking RJ about starting Austin Dillon in the playoff Richmond race, and then he wanted me to play William Byron over him. Well, it turns out Byron finished outside the top 20, and Austin Dillon went on to finish 4th with 2 seconds in both stages, with a total of around 51 points. So just ask for advice, see what they say, and then just coin flip on whether or not you want to listen to it, I guess. But anyways, I'm going to cap things off with my final tip. At tip number 17, just have fun. Just a game after all, and besides a hefty amount of pocket change for finishing first overall, $10,000. Also, if you finish first overall in the Crown Jewel races, just at the end of it all, it is a fun game of fantasy and good bragging rights too. That's all my tips I can think of. Thank you all for watching. Next week should be my last NASCAR Fantasy video before the season finally starts, I'm going to give you a tier list for all the drivers that you should play, and also give you my insight on where you should play those drivers. And through the tier list, I'll show you visualization on how far they'll be in the playoffs, or where they're going to be in the point standings, and who's going to be in that Final Four at Phoenix in November. So till then, I'll see you guys later. Thank you for watching.